Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome all to the Narrate Course Realty Bridge. Today's session is all about GST and real estate sector, mainly the unresolved issues in GST that we face in real estate sector. Today's session is in continuation with the session which was conducted on last Saturday, that is 26th of June. And I'm sure a lot of you guys know Mr. Sailesh Sheth from the previous session, but for members who have joined in today, I would still like to take a small introduction of Mr. Sailesh Sheth. Sailesh Sheth, he has an experience of over 30 years in the field of consulting, advisory, litigation practice, in the field of indirect tax laws that include central excise, service tax, customs, state VAT laws, CGST, and GST. Okay, so a lot of experience that he has is going to get reflected in the session today. We've got a lot of insights in the previous session, and a lot of questions have come up. I'm sure that he's going to be able to address most of them today. In case he's not able to address today, he'll definitely get back to you through an email, or we may organize a question answer session thereafter. Okay. Over to you, Sailesh bhai.
Yes. Good morning to all of you. So we take off considering the constraint of time today and the topics which are required to be covered. I'll just come straight to the subject itself. In the last meeting on 26th June, the issues which we deliberated upon were and just to have a recap, the first and foremost issue was the constitutional validity of notification number 3/2019. That was what we had looked into. In my opinion, in which I expressed, was that the very entire notification 3/2019, by which the parent notification 11/2017 has been amended, and the new revamped real estate structure has been introduced for the sector with effect from 1/4/2019, the entire notification validity is susceptible to serious challenge. I explained that this notification, which has been issued by simultaneous recourse to the statutory provisions of section 9(1)(3)(4), then section 15, which is relating to valuation, section 16(1), which relates to ITC, section 11, which relates to exemption notification, and section 148, whereby the central government has been empowered to specify the class of persons for the purpose of registration, payment of tax, and filing of the returns. The simultaneous recourse to all these notifications was not only unusual, but also extremely susceptible to the challenge. In my opinion, the very validity of the notification 3/2019 is susceptible to serious challenge, and it is invalid notification. The other issue which we discussed was the surprised omission of works contract entry from the original notification. The entry now remains as one residual entry only remains at item number 12 of para 3 of the notification, the amended para 3 of the notification. While I explained the implications of the omission of this works contract entry, the another very pertinent question that has arisen is whether the 1% and 5% rate of tax on the affordable and non-affordable housing, which has been introduced with effect from 1/4/2019, is it really mandatory as it is being projected by the revenue and accepted by the sector? Is it compulsory to forgo the ITC benefit and stick to 1% or 5% depending upon the nature of the housing which is being constructed and provided? I opined that notwithstanding the omission of the entry relating to works contract and notwithstanding the conditions relating to the non-entitlement to ITC, as also the FAQ released by the revenue, North Block, CBIC, the legal position remains that the builder developer has an option to opt for the appropriate rate of tax, that is 18% on the for the sale of the under construction, supply of the under construction units, residential units, and he can avail the full ITC on the material and services going into the construction activity. Not only that, the actual land cost and not 1/3 cost. The actual land cost also can be claimed as a deduction from the entire value. As far as the buyer's concern or buyer's apprehension is concerned, it is permissible for the builder to actually charge him 5%, depending upon if it is non-affordable, to charge him 5%, but at the same time, deposit 18%, the tax at the rate of 18% in the kitty of the government. The very proposition that 1% or 5% without ITC has now become mandatory is, in my opinion, cannot stand the scrutiny of law. And that I have explained in detail that why it is. Whether at the ground level, at the implementation level, whether one would really be inclined to go for the other option or not, that's a different matter. That is an individual call to be taken. But I was just explaining the legal position. Then another very important and an issue, a highly disputed issue, which we discussed, and that is about the levy of GST on immovable property, and particularly on the FSI, TDR, or development rights. I've explained my view that development rights or transferable development rights or FSI, they owe their existence, they owe their existence to the existence of the land only. They do not exist in vacuum. They are not independently in existence. Please. Hello. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
you are
yes.
audible.
Yeah.
You are
Okay,
audible.
fine.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. So I explained that development rights or TDR, they are the rights arising in, from, or attached to the land. The land definition under the various enactments, though the term has not been defined under the CGST Act, but going by the land definition available in General Clauses Act, Transfer of Property Act, immovable property, the land is definitely covered by the immovable property, and it also includes the rights arising from the land or attached to the land. That being the case, development rights are nothing but the rights arising from the land, and therefore, any supply of development rights per se cannot attract the levy of GST, nor were they attracting the levy of service tax, irrespective of the contraposition being adopted by the revenue, or there could be a contra views by the or there could be. I think somebody's mic is on. Can you please take care?
Suresh, please mute everyone else.
Yes.
Somebody's mic is on, please.
Please mute all. Vishal.
Shailesh, you can unmute yourself, please.
Okay. So, hello. Yes. It's clear now?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yeah, right.
Yes,
Okay.
you are audible.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, FSI or development rights or the TDR owe their exigence to the existence of the land. They are rights arising out of or attached to the earth or land, and therefore covered by the definition of land, and therefore covered by the definition of immovable property as well. Unlike Section 65B44 of the Finance Act 1994 that defines service, which uses the word transaction in immovable property, the word immovable property certainly is not used in the definition of goods or definition of services, nor has it been used in Schedule 3 of the CGST Act. Schedule 3, as you are all aware, covers the activities or transactions which are declared as neither amounting to supply of goods nor amounting to supply or of services. However, in my opinion, the non-mention of immovable property per se does not make any difference whatsoever, because sale of land is actually excluded, though not necessarily. Even if it would not have been excluded, it would not have been brought to the GST under service. I'll come to that at a later part of our discussion today. So sale of land and the word land, even though the rights arising from the land are not specifically mentioned, the land will have to be defined as is understood in the common parlance as well as is understood as defined under the different enactments. And therefore, the supply of FSI or TDR or the development rights cannot attract the levy of GST at all, and therefore, consequently, in any manner, directly or indirectly, at some point of time, if it is proposed to levy on GST, levy GST on the development rights, in my opinion, it is absolutely illegal and unconstitutional. We also discussed this very issue in the context of the landowner vis-a-vis the developer builder under the joint development agreement. And I have explained that how a landowner who has been brought under the levy of GST indirectly via an explanation whereby it is provided that if a landowner shares his area of constructed units before completion certificate is received, he would be liable to pay the GST at the 1% or 5%. However, he would be entitled to take the ITC of the tax charged to him by the builder developer. I have clearly opined that under no circumstances a landowner can be made liable to pay GST, and he cannot be put at par with the actual builder developer who undertakes the supply of service of the construction of complex and liable to pay tax in terms of Section 7 read with para 5B of Schedule 2. So with this, now we will proceed. Today, the major issues which I intend to deal with are the issues relating to the redevelopment of the society or under SRA or MADA project. That is one. Then the second issue is regarding the issues concerning the self-redevelopment by the society, a trend which is now visible in a city like Mumbai, though really not picked up. The third is about the entitlement to ITC on the material and services going into the construction of the commercial complex, shopping malls, etc., in which the units are ultimately rented out by the builder. That is the one. And the last major issue which I intend to dwell upon is the taxability of the plotted land or the developed plots as is normally understood. Connected with this or arising from these four major issues will be certain peripheral issues which also we should look into. Let me now first take up the case of the redevelopment. Please pardon me with this entire presentation because I will be completely fine-tuning this presentation and via the organizers via NaredCo, I will have it actually shared with everybody. So just for the time being, I will just go ahead with this project. In case of redevelopment of the society, generally two models can be there. The one where the society ropes in a developer for the redevelopment work, or the society undertakes the redevelopment himself. Now itself, in case of the when the society ropes in a builder for the redevelopment of the society, then the issues which normally would arise will be one, society and members' perspective, certain issues which will arise will be how normally a redevelopment activity is undertaken. First of all, this redevelopment can be in terms of the the statute, where around if a building is under dilapidated condition and after 18 years if it is compulsorily to be redeveloped, or where the society on its own undertakes the decision to redevelop. So a builder is engaged, and as a consideration for the builder to undertake the redevelopment activity, extra FSI which is available to the society would be actually given to the builder as consideration. Builder would, in the meantime, while the redevelopment activity is undertaken, he would demolish the building. He will shift all the existing members of the society to the another place for which he may agree to pay the house rent allowance or the rent or any other compensation. Not only that, the builder may even pay one-time corpus to the society. He may even pay shifting allowance and such other charges as may be agreed upon under different heads. And at the same time, the builder would offer the new flat with some additional area in lieu of the old flat which has been demolished in and that additional area is free of cost. Now, it is in this context we have to see what is the issue, what are the issues which would arise in the context of the taxability from the society perspective, from the members perspective, and from the developers perspective. First of all, let us one second. Let us understand the entire nature of the construction activity, and that it is not a disputed position at all that construction activity or construction contract is a works contract. This has been very succinctly held now by the Supreme Court in L&T Limited versus State of Karnataka 303 ELT3. It is a works contract where the element of the transfer of property in the goods involved in the execution of the works contract is subjected to levy of the VAT or sales tax earlier, and it has also now been given the constitutional recognition via insertion of Article 366(29)(a). So it is a deemed sale. Now, the question here is, the Supreme Court has very clearly said in the L&T case, the intention, ultimate transaction between the parties may be sale of flat, but it cannot be said that the characteristics of work contract are not involved in that transaction, and therefore it is amenable to the tax. The question what we have to ask ourselves is, can it be said that the society, while roping a builder for the redevelopment of its society building, is actually availing the works contract service or construction service? That is what the question would arise. What exactly society, which represents the members of the society, really intend to do? What is the intention between the parties? On one side, there is a society. This is a tripartite where the members are only joined because general body resolution will have to be passed and minimum 70% consent of the members would be required for the redevelopment. Now, that's why the members are joined. There is no individual agreement between the individual member and vis-a-vis the builder. The agreement is between the society and the builder, where the members join as a third party, consenting parties. Intention of the society is to obtain the redeveloped property for existing members, and the intention of the developer is to develop the property using additional FSI given to it by the society and sell the developed property, that is sellable area, to the independent buyers. These are the intention in case of any redevelopment. I'll repeat, intention of the society is to have the redeveloped property constructed by the builder for the existing members, and for the developer is to construct the redeveloped property by using additional FSI and then sell it in the market to the independent buyers. It is this intention which is the central point which should be kept in mind while deciding the taxability. In BSNL case 2006 SCC, the Supreme Court said that in any supply transaction, the seller and the purchaser must be ad idem as to the subject matter of sale or purchase. They must be on the same page. They must be have the consensus on the subject matter of the agreement and what the agreement is intended for, and what the parties are expecting from each other. The court would have to arrive at the conclusion as to what the parties have intended when they entered into a particular transaction of sale as being the subject matter of sale or purchase. In arriving at a conclusion, the court would have to approach the matter from the point of view of a reasonable person of average intelligence. So it is the intention of the parties which is reflected in the contract, which would be material for deciding a host of the issues, including the leviability of any tax, including GST, or maybe previously service tax. The intention of the society is not to avail the construction service, and the intention of the developer is not to provide the construction service. The existing building is demolished, new building is constructed, in which ultimately both the parties, I want to have, so as a society wants to have a new flat in lieu of the old flat, and the developer wants to exploit the additional FSI given to it for construction, for which he intends to sell in the market. It is in this context we have to now see the leviability of GST on the free of cost flats allotted to the members. By and large, whatever I've been now discussing for another maybe 20-25 minutes will be, by and large, it will be relevant even under the SRS scheme and the MADA scheme also. This entire issue can be addressed from two perspectives: constitutional perspective and the statutory provisions, that is CGST Act statutory perspective. As we saw last time, that the power to levy GST on the supply of goods or services or both are, the mother source lies in new Article 246A of the Constitution, which has been introduced via 101st Constitutional Amendment Act. Article 246A starts with the non-obstante clause, notwithstanding anything contained in Article 246 or Article 254. Article 246 clearly demarcates the legislative and taxation powers between the union and the states. There is a union list and there is a state list 2. Union list is 1. Under state list 2, we refer to two entries. The entry 18, which is the land and buildings, and entry 49, which is the tax on the land and buildings. So what is really significant, that even after 101st Amendment, even after introduction of GST, and even after the Article 246 having been made overriding in nature, the existing demarcation of powers, so far as the immovable properties like land and building are concerned, that demarcation remains unaffected. States continue to wield the power, continue to have the power to levy the tax, to make the laws relating to the land and building and on the tax on the land and building in terms of entry 18 and entry 49 of the Constitution of Article 246, Schedule 7. So it is in this context we have to see that exclusion of immovable property from the scope of levy via Schedule 3. In my opinion, even if sale of land and sale of building would not have been excluded from the scope of Schedule 3 specifically, it could never have been brought under the GST levy under the supply of service. Service has been defined as means anything other than goods. However, merely because this wide-ranging, amplitude of the service definition, immovable property cannot be brought within the scope of the service if it is not specifically excluded, because the very Article 246A speaks about the GST as a levy on the supply of goods or services or both. GST is not contemplated to be levied on the immovable property transactions at all. This is first proposition I am making. 2, the powers to levy the tax and make the laws relating to land and building continues to lie with the states, and union has no power to meddle into it. Clear demarcation of powers. This is the second proposition. The third proposition is, when we talk about the exclusion, Schedule 3 of CGST Act, by specifically mentioning sale of land and sale of building as a no supply of goods or no supply of service, which actually scoring the self goal, it can cannot mean that it is because it is excluded, it is not leviable to tax. What can be excluded is which is otherwise included or includable. If something is not otherwise included or something is not includable at all, the question of excluding it from the scope of the levy does not arise. this is the third proposition I am making. If land itself cannot be said to be included within the definition of goods or services, the question of excluding it and thereby providing the relief from the levy of GST via Schedule 3 does not arise. So, and with this, it can be said that any transactions involving the immovable property remain outside the purview of the levy of GST, irrespective of whether one takes recourse to the Schedule 3 or not. Looked in from this perspective, coming back to the redevelopment, what society gives under redevelopment arrangement? Society permits the developer to construct extra floors on their head, the existing building, which might be 5-storied, then that building may be, the redeveloped property may now contain 7 or 8-storied, and the 3 floors extra, society gives the permission. And there is a barter in the immobile property in the sense that if the extra FSI given by the society with the permission to build and sell those flats by utilizing that FSI, if those FSI itself comes within the purview of immobile property, against that, what the society for its members get is also newly constructed flat without any consideration. So it is possible to say that this is nothing but a barter in the immobile property. And since the immobile property transactions remain outside the purview of levy, in any case, without even constitutionally, they remain outside the purview of the tax, the GST cannot be made applicable on the free of cost units supplied by the builder to the members. This is no doubt, these are all dispute prone, highly debatable view. There are advance authority rulings. I will come to advance authority ruling at a later date. What is the impact of the advance authority ruling and implications and binding effect? And because in the context of landowner vis-a-vis builder also, so similar logic can be applied where the transfer of development rights or the permission to develop the land is involved, against which the constructed area is given. But I may definitely should point out that in the case of LCS City Makers Limited, Private Limited, 30 STR 33, the Chennai Tribunal has taken a view that the landowner transferring a part of his land to developer, and thereafter landowner's share of undivided share of land of flats is registered in his name, which are actually constructed area is given. This is held to be liable to service tax. This judgment has been distinguished later on in another judgment. We will come to that in a minute. But yes, constitutional perspective, it is possible to argue that free of cost units allotted by the developer in the redeveloped property cannot be subjected to GST. Now, let us look at it from the statutory provisions perspective. For that, I will just go back in the time in the service tax arena from the negative list. I will not go too much back in the time. This whole controversy has remained there right from 2010 onwards, if not earlier. But I will just take it from 1/7/2012, when the negative list was introduced. In the context of the free of cost flats allotted by the developer in the redeveloped society to the members, the board has actually clarified via its circular dated 31st August 2012 that it is liable to service tax, and the valuation for the valuation purpose, section 767 read with valuation rules should be applied. There are no plausible, credible, any detailed valid reasonings are forthcoming. The board has simply said that they are liable, and the only recourse is taken to that prior to negative list, the members to whom free of cost flats are given were ultimately meant for their personal use, and any residential unit given for the personal use were not liable to tax. Construction of residential unit for personal use was not liable to tax. Board said that was the position prevalent only up to negative list came into effect. Therefore, now it is liable. However, in Vasanta Green project case, 20 GSTL 568, Hyderabad bench of the tribunal has after going through the legal position and facts of the case, has very clearly held that even in case of free of, and this is after negative list, even in case of free of cost units allotted in a redeveloped property by the builder to the members, the cost of construction as well as the cost of acquisition of the extra FSI from the society are all inbuilt into the sale price of the independent sellable area, which the builder sells to the independent buyers and on which service tax is being paid. That being the case, when the entire service tax is being paid on the sellable area, which includes the cost of construction for the free of cost allotted unit to the members and the cost of acquisition of the development rights or FSI from the society, there cannot be a levy of service tax on the free of cost. With the computation and chartered accountant certificate, it was demonstrated that how the service tax was being paid on the sale price of the independently sold under construction units to the independent buyers, which included the cost of construction of the free of cost units allotted to the members also. So the board, the tribunal in this case has discussed the applicability of the board circular, whereby it is said that free of cost units will also attract the levy of service tax. They have also discussed the LCS city maker judgment, where a different view had been taken in the context of the landowner vis-a-vis the developer. No doubt, Vasanta Green project has been challenged. It is pending before Supreme Court. But in my personal view, the ratio of the proposition laid down in Vasanta Green will continue to be relevant even under GST. And therefore, if as an additional ground, if a builder developer can demonstrate that the GST which is being discharged on the independently sold units to the independent buyers in a redeveloped property includes the cost of construction of the free of cost units allotted to the existing members, then the levy cannot, the GST cannot be charged on that free of cost. It will also tantamount to double taxation. This will all subject to the dispute. Apart from that, it is all subject to the laying down the evidence also. This would need it. But the Vasanta Green remains relevant in the context of GST also. Another important point, another angle to look at it, any development activity undertaken by the builder or developer, the construction, that activity is always booked as an expense. Income will arise only when the independently sellable area, the units are sold to the independent buyers. If the redevelopment activity is booked as expense, there cannot be service tax or GST on the expenses. The income starts flowing in the books of accounts only when the sellable area, the sellable units are sold. Till that time, whatever construction activity is undertaken, whether for the in respect of the free of cost units to be allotted to the members or free of cost units to be or the sellable units to be sold to the buyers, these are all booked as the expense only. There can't be service tax or GST on the expenses. The redevelopment of the society building property and its subsequent handing over to the society can at best be a consideration for the development rights supplied by the society. That I am, you give me the additional FSI, allow me to exploit it, allow me to construct some additional floors in the redeveloped property, and this is a consideration for me as a builder, and I will allot the free of cost units as per the agreed area to the members. And that is a consideration, that is not a service. There is a very, very remarkable and significant distinction between what is a consideration for a contract and what is a condition of the contract. When the builder or developer agrees to provide, to demolish the building, construct the new building, and allot the free of cost units of the agreed area to the existing members, is it a consideration or is it a condition to the contract? It is a condition to the contract. This distinction between consideration to a contract, for a contract, and condition of a contract has been very, very succinctly brought out by the tribunal larger bench very recently in Repco Home Finance case. 2020 TIOL 1039. In this case, it was a case of liquidated damages and other charges. In this case, tribunal took note of the larger bench decision in Bayana Builders case. Some of you might even recall that in the service tax, Bayana Builders is one of the most prominent judgment where the issue was whether the free of cost material provided to the contractor will become part of the taxable value for service structure or not. The ruling, larger bench ruling came in favor of the SSE's appellants, and it has been also with a very recent order upheld by the Supreme Court. So the ratio of Bayana Builders also remains relevant under GST. But in this case of Bayana Builders, consideration for a contract and condition of a contract have been discussed at length. And the larger bench also took note of the Australian GST structure and the Australian GST rules and clarification by the Australian GST authorities, where the distinction between condition to a contract and consideration has been considered. I would just like to mention here, the Indian GST design and structure, with India being a federal polity, we have picked up not many things from the Canadian model, Australian GST, which is a federal unity, where there also this relationship is there, and European Union. These are the three major things. And if one were to compare the Indian GST, certain fundamental, the character, certain provisions or the designs, then it is more or less at par, or maybe hinging upon or brought from the foreign jurisdiction, mainly Australia, Canada, and European Union. So in Australian GST, the condition of a contract and consideration, a categorical distinction was made between condition to a contract and a consideration. It has been prescribed under the Australian GST rules that certain conditions contained in a contract cannot be seen in the light of consideration for the contract, and merely because the service recipient has to fulfill such condition or service provider has to fulfill such condition, the value will not form part of the value of the taxable services to be provided. Consideration must flow from the service recipient to service provider and should accrue to the benefit of the service provider. Any consideration in any form must flow from, when as a professional, when I'm giving the services to my client pays me the fees. That fees is a consideration for me. It is flowing from the service recipient to me as a service provider, and it is accruing to my benefit. That fees is to my benefit, in lieu of which I'm providing the services to my client. And it is therefore the amount charged has necessarily to be a consideration for the services provided. The condition to a contract cannot be actually taxed by including the value thereof in the contract. What is important is no service tax could be levied on the construction of the member set of flats, because it is a condition to the contract that builder will provide free of cost agreed area of the new units to the members. This is another proposition from which this whole issue can be looked into. Now, these propositions laid down under service tax remain relevant under GST. From there, I will now take it forward. All the three propositions, constitutional perspective, statutory perspective, and this interpretation and the distinction between condition to a contract and the consideration. Keeping that in mind, what is the position under GST? Under GST, the department views has remained the same, that all free of cost unit constructed and allotted attract the GST. This is clearly brought out in the circular dated 14th May 2019. And question number 8, where this legal position has been explained. I mean, this is the board's views. Board circulars, if they are prejudicial to the interest of the SSE or taxpayers, are not binding, they can certainly be challenged. If they are for the benefit of the taxpayers, then the department cannot take the contra stand. This is by and large the settled position, Supreme Court Ratan Melting case. So then comes another added argument, which is also relevant under service tax. And now, assuming for the moment that free of cost units allotted to the members of the society are liable to tax, what should be the valuation? The department's view, the board's view is that the value should be the value of the similar flats sold to the independent buyers. This is the by and large accepted position everywhere. Is this correct? Is this really permissible in law? Admittedly, there is no transaction value value available for the free of cost units allotted to the members. So section 15(1) will not apply. Section 15 is a comprehensive piece of provision for the valuation purpose. Therefore, we will have to resort to valuation rules as per section 15 subsection 4, that where the value cannot be determined, then it has to be determined in terms of the valuation rules which are prescribed. There are valuation rules are section 27 to section 31. Rule 27 to rule 31. Now, rule 27, which is the first rule of the valuation rules under GST, it speaks about where the consideration is not wholly in money. When what the builder's consideration in this entire activity is the additional FSI which he gets for the exploitation and for the construction of the sellable area which he sells to the independent buyers. This is a consideration in kind. Assuming the taxability of the free of cost units to be allotted to the members, the value, can it be determined by recourse to Rule 27? In my opinion, no, because Rule 27 would not apply when the entire consideration is in kind. If you see, I'm not going into sub-rule 1, 2, 3, 4, because that would become too technical. But if you very carefully see, Rule 27 would apply only and only if there is a partly the consideration is money and partly it is into non-monetary consideration. When the entire consideration is non-monetary, like development rights, assuming it is to be a consideration, taxable consideration, then that consideration is in kind entirely, and therefore Rule 27 cannot come into play. Two illustrations given under Rule 27 also would make it very clear that it will come into play only and only if where the consideration is partly in money and the rest balance is as a non-monetary consideration. This is basically a bad drafting. Under service tax, the valuation rules were actually framed and drafted in a much pragmatic manner. This could not have been the intention of the legislature, but today, as the Rule 27 exists, it is, in my view, it cannot come into play when the entire consideration is in the kind. 28, 29 are no more applicable. They are not relevant at all. And therefore, the 30 and 31, then we come to the last rule, which is the residual method. That residual method only speaks about that if the value cannot be determined in terms of any of the foregoing rules, then it should be determined by reasonably applying the best rule, which is basically, in a way, it is a best judgment method of assessment. And there, the another proposition which I would like to make it, that when the valuation mechanism itself fails, the entire levy fails. Today, there is no valuation mechanism provided for the value of the development rights wherever it is proposed to be taxed in any manner, be it in respect of the redevelopment activity or in respect of the units which are sold after completion certificate under a JDA arrangement. You know that development rights have been exempted, and then at the first instance they are exempted, and any units which are sold post completion certificate, one has to pay the GST on the proportionate development rights. I am presuming the taxability of development rights here, and which I have already said, the levy of GST cannot be attracted on development rights. Therefore, exemption is unwarranted and misnomer. But assuming the taxability, in no case development rights can be valued at the prices of the independently constructed units and sold in the market, similar flats. That being the case, because the valuation mechanism do not provide for that also, and Rule 27 being not applicable, one of the most celebrity case, the law laid down remains always valid in context of not only indirect tax but direct tax, and that is the Supreme Court judgment in Govind Saran Gangasaran 155 ITR 1985. Supreme Court has said there are 4 components of any valid tax levy. Which are the 4 components? The first is the character of the levy, which is the taxable event. What is the taxable event or character of the levy of GST? GST is a tax on the supply of goods or services or both. So the taxable event is when the supply takes place. Then second component is person liable to pay tax. The third component is rate at which the tax is to be computed and paid. And the fourth is the measure or value to which the rate of tax is to be applied. Supreme Court said that if any of these 4 components is not clearly visible or ascertainable or defined, then it cannot be said, it is difficult to say that there exists a valid levy. This has also been, the same view has been expressed by Supreme Court in B.C. Srinivasa Setty's case and also Mathuram Agarwal case also. That is also in Mathuram Agarwal case, 1999 8 SCC. Here, so one of the important component of a valid tax levy is the value or measure to which the rate of tax can be applied. If that mechanism fails, then the very levy fails. And I am not making any strange or any new proposition. Please see the Supreme Court judgment in Larsen and Toubro, another Larsen and Toubro, where they have posed the entire levy of service tax on the real estate sector prior to 2007. On 1/7/2007, works contract service came. But as I mentioned last time also, that between 2004 and 2007, the service tax in crores and crores of rupees, hundreds of crores of rupees paid by the real estate sector on the sale of the under constructed residential or commercial construction unit was totally unwarranted, and the collection was without authority of law. Because the existing entries prior to 2007 applied only to services and not to the construction activity, which is a works contract, a composite contract. And that's why I refer to the L&T judgment in the beginning today. And this is what ultimately, after a decade almost, Supreme Court upheld that no levy existed before works contract came into being. And the plank of the Supreme Court decision has been that there is no separate valuation mechanism provided for the exclusion of the value of the goods under the existing service tax entries. It came to be provided only with the introduction of works contract service. Because the valuation mechanism was not there, the levy was also held to be illegal and unconstitutional. This was also another ground. By the same rationale, for the development rights, since there is no valuation mechanism exists and no rules, none of the rules apply, it is possible to argue that in no manner and under no circumstances, directly or indirectly, development rights can be subjected to tax. And because the free of cost units are required to be valued, the similarly unit flat, the whole proposition actually fails. It is actually the self-serving provision which cannot stand the scrutiny of the law. The other aspect is here, which is also extremely relevant and important, that assuming for the moment that the similarly sold flats value is adopted, independent buyers, that would also include the undivided share in the land. And therefore that 1/3 deduction is provided. We have seen earlier that this notional deduction of 1/3 of the value of the land is also seriously susceptible to challenge, particularly on those cases where the value of the land happens to be more than 33% of the total value. It has already been challenged before the Gujarat High Court. We have seen that last week. Only last month it has been challenged. This only 1/3 deduction aspect and not providing for the deduction earlier. So what happens legally when the value of the land is say 50%, but when the deduction is provided only for 1/3, 33%, indirectly there is a levy of tax on the balance 17% of the value of the land. In the beginning, we have seen that immobile property, tax on immobile property is not permissible under GST constitutionally. So indirectly, the levy of tax on the balance 17% of the value of the land, hypothetically in the given example, which we are talking about, is unconstitutional because that levy, the subject remains with the state governments. Union is not even empowered to, apart from the fact that GST cannot be levied on the immovable property. And indirectly, GST is being levied on the value of the land, which forms part of the taxable value when it is in excess of 33%. So when the value of similarly sold flats is adopted for the value of the free of cost units being allotted to the members, and if in the value which is adopted, where the land value goes beyond 1/3, indirectly, it also creeps into the valuation in the hands of the existing members to whom free of cost units are allotted. And there is indirectly a tax in the hands of the members also on the value of the land in excess of 33%, because the base is the value of the unit sold independently to the buyers. This is another way, angle from which this whole proposition to levy GST on the free of cost units allotted can be challenged. And no doubt, these are highly dispute-prone area. This will have to be settled in the court of law only. I'm very much conscious about this. The very issue of the scope of entry 18 and entry 49 of state list 2, and whether the state retains the power or whether the union can also, like royalty on the mining, this issue is pending before the 9 judges bench, now 11 judges, I understand, and probably this entire issue may be now referred to the 15 judges bench. It is hanging fire since long. This issue is pending in the Mineral Development Corporation case, and very recently it has also been referred to the, and that is a 2011-4 SCC. It is pending before the larger bench. We don't know when whether 11 judges or 15 judges bench will be constituted. And it has also been referred recently into 13 GSTL 3 Supreme Court. So this will definitely have the bearing on not only in the royalty on the mining, but overall scheme or constitutional scheme of the powers between the union and the states, which will in turn will have the impact on the leviability of service tax or GST on the supply of the development rights or sale of TDR or FSI, etc. But as the provisions exist today, as the constitutional scheme of the things today, it is very much possible to argue that development rights cannot be subjected to the levy of service tax or GST, nor on the other side, free of cost units allotted to the members can be subjected to GST. From the society perspective also, they are providing the additional FSI. The same thing we can see under the SRA scheme also. SRA, two things can take place. Either there is a government land which has been encroached upon, which is intended to be freed by the government, or there is a private landowner whose land has been encroached upon by the slum dwellers, who approaches the SRA. And then a developer is actually roped in. There is an arrangement either between SRA and the developer directly, or there is a arrangement between the SRA developer and the original landowner, whereby the entire new construction is undertaken, where the slum dwellers are settled, and as far as the landowner, either he gets, suppose there is a private landowner involved into this, he either gets the constructed area or whatever arrangement is there. If it is directly between SRA and the builder developer, then the builder developer gets the TDR. In either case, he gets the TDR, which either he can exploit it in the whatever geographical location provided as per the DCR, or he can actually sell it in the market like a accessory. Basically, it carries the TDR. So the supply of TDR we have already gone into. In my opinion, it is not liable to tax. In all these cases also, the free of cost units allotted to the original occupants or slum dwellers, the same ratio applies even in case of the Mahada society also, where the redevelopment takes place. In Mahada case also, it is the same thing. okay, whereby the same logic will apply when we look into the, the leviability of tax on the free of cost units allotted to. There is another important thing one has to understand, which will also be relevant under the self-redevelopment, that GST is a levy on the supply of goods or services. Supply is defined in an inclusive manner under section 7(1)(a). It is defined in an inclusive manner. But any supply of goods or services or both will be taxable only, first of all, when the two conditions are satisfied. One, there should be a consideration. Two, the supply should be in the course or furtherance of business. Unless these two conditions are satisfied, or any of these two conditions is dispensed with by the legislature, like Schedule 1 consideration condition has been dispensed with. So unless that is so, the levy cannot get attracted. It should be in the furtherance or course of business. The term business has been defined again in an inclusive manner, in a very exhaustive manner. The point is, can the cooperative housing society be said to be engaged in business when it undertakes a redevelopment activity or self-redevelopment activity? Can it be said that they are engaged in the business? It ropes in the developer for redevelopment, and acting on behalf of the members, the society actually undertakes to give the additional FSI in favor of the builder developer. Can it be said this is an activity in the course or furtherance of business? If you see the conjoint reading of Maharashtra Cooperative Societies Act, the model bylaws, which are actually by and large on the same line in every state, and the constitutional framework governing the cooperative housing societies on the conjoint and harmonious reading of all these provisions will lead to the conclusion, and inescapable conclusion, that the society cannot be said to be engaged in the business. The provisions relating to society were introduced in the Constitution of India by the 97th Constitutional Amendment of 2011. Chapter 9B, Part 9B was introduced specifically, Part 9, Roman 9B. Part 9B contains Articles 243ZQ to Article 243ZT. This entire set of articles relates to the cooperative society, and the intention is to promote the cooperative principles and cooperative movement in the country. It is with this objective, the new articles, the legal framework has been introduced in the Constitution. The objective of the cooperative society is not to make a profit, and they are not allowed to make the profit as any other business enterprises. Cooperative housing society, when it is not engaged in the business, it is to undertake various activities as provided in the bylaws, as also within the Maharashtra Cooperative Society Act as prescribed. And one of the activity which the society is required to undertake periodically or once in a while is the redevelopment. That is, and redevelopment is the part of the objective of the cooperative society. And therefore, it cannot be said to be engaged into the business when it undertakes the redevelopment activity for its members, and when the development rights or the FSI is transferred. Here also the doctrine of mutuality will come into play, but I will come to that when I take up self-redevelopment in detail. So the question from the society perspective is that these from constitutional, statutory provision and valuation perspective, in the context of the inclusion of the value of the land, the conveyance of the land on which the society building is situated is always in favor of the society. Members are not the owners of the land or the residential units per se. They do not actually, they are not owning that land, undivided share in the land. The members' ownership is represented only by the share certificate which it is holding. Member as such cannot transfer the residential unit, nor the member can be permitted or allowed, he can transfer the land, undivided share in the land. What he transfers when he sells his flat, what member transfers is only the shares that shares which represents his ownership in the residential unit, and it is transferred when he sells his units. That being the case, and the land and building never appears in the books of the individual member. In the individual member's books of account, only the flat represented by the said certificate is only appearing as a ownership flat. The land and building always appears as an asset in the balance sheet of the society. Now, since the members can only transfer the shares and they are being made parties for in the redevelopment arrangement just for the purpose of the consent with the bylaws and the statutorily mandate, the no supply takes place when the members actually hand over the possession for the redevelopment activity. There is no supply, there is no taxable supply whatsoever. Member has an occupancy interest in the flat, which allows him to inhabit and enjoy the place. When the builder undertakes the redevelopment, when the builder does not acquire the right to inhabit that residential premises, he does not acquire the occupancy interest. That right remains with the existing member. And therefore, even from this perspective, the levy of GST or service tax cannot be held to be valid or justified. And the last important thing is about from the member's perspective, is about an act to tolerate for the whatever compensation member is receiving or society is receiving. I'll come to that in a while on that part also. So, friends, whether it is a redevelopment of the society, private society, whether it is a redevelopment of the MADA society in terms of regulation 33(5), or whether it is the SRA project, in any of the case, the leviability of GST, either on the development rights at some point of time indirectly or directly, or on the free of cost units allotted to the existing members or the occupants or the slum dwellers, is definitely subject matter of challenge. In my opinion, the GST is not attracted in such type of redevelopment activity on the free of cost. That brings to the another issue. In that case, what happens to the Senvet credit or ITC? Senvet credit was available to the real estate sector under service tax till 30th June 2017, and ITC was available under GST till 31st March 2019. Now, in any redevelopment project where such, if free of cost service tax liability or GST liability is not discharged, or if it is actually contested by the developer, in that, and if he would have availed the Senvet credit or ITC on the entire construction material or services, because this is a continuous project, whether proportionate service tax or GST is required to be reversed or not. That is another question which is actually right now raging fire across the country. The legal position, if I would to very briefly explain on this, is one, that prior to 2016, there was absolutely no mechanism provided under Rule 6 of the Senvet Credit Rules 2004, whereby Senvet credit attributable to the units which are sold post completion certificate was available, nor such free of cost units allotted to the members can be said to be the exempted service. Because if you go by the notification exempted service rule defining exempted service, it does not fall into that. That being the case, the Senvet credit reversible on proportionate basis was really not called for, nor that demand on this count can be sustained. On 1/4/2016, an explanation was inserted in Rule 6, whereby it is provided that the impact of the application is, or intention was, that the proportionate Senvet credit would become reversible if the input or input services are used for anything, any activity which is not a service. So sale of the units post completion certificate is a sale of the immobile property per se. It is not a service. It was on the basis of this that 1 year from 1/4/2016 to June 17, some disputes have arisen. These disputes are pending. In my opinion, even the very validity of this explanation in the context of the service tax law and the service definition is susceptible to challenge. But as a worst case scenario, the liability can arise only in respect of 1 year from 1/4/2016 to 30th June 2017. In case of free of cost unit allotted to the existing members, maybe the same rationale can be applied by the department for that also, if at all, and the units which are sold post completion certificate. Coming to GST, incidentally, there is a TPL Builders Bangalore bench judgment very clearly saying that in the absence of any specific provision requiring the reversal of the proportionate SENVAT credit in respect of the units sold post completion certificate, SENVAT credit cannot be denied. That was the position also prior to 1/4/2016. The tribunal took the note of the Gujarat High Court judgment in Alembic Limited case in this regard, where the same principle has been laid down. Under GST, in my opinion, the same principle will hold the field, because in case of exempt supply which has been defined, the exempt supply means a supply, one, which is exempted under a notification wholly, or which is chargeable to nil rate of tax. There are some tariff items, particularly goods which are chargeable to tariff rate itself is